thereby also blocking cysteine uptake into cells. Within the cell, as I mentioned, cysteine is rapidly reduced to cysteine, which then is incorporated into glutathione. So basically inhibiting this antiporter reduces glutathione levels in cells. And there are other ways that can reduce glutathione levels in cells as well. But regardless, like impacting its synthesis, for instance.
Yeah.
But regardless, the reduction of glutathione impacts these glutathione peroxidases that I mentioned. And one in particular that's key to this cell death pathway is glutathione peroxidase 4, which is one of the very few enzymes in cells that's able to remove lipid peroxides in membranes, and it converts them to lipid alcohols, which are essentially innocuous. And so this loss of glutathione leads to inhibition of the glutathione peroxidase activity, and therefore increases in lipid peroxidation. And that is enhanced by the ability, as I mentioned earlier, of iron to convert a reactive oxygen species, hydrogen peroxide, which actually doesn't peroxidize lipids, into a hydroxyl radical, which can peroxidize lipids. And so even under kind of, I guess you would say, basic conditions, if you would start to inhibit glutathione peroxidase 4, you can lead to an increase in lipid peroxidation through just the fact that there's iron in cells, and as we talked about earlier, you're constantly generating a certain level of reactive oxygen species, and this, obviously this is part of this imbalance that all of a sudden, with the loss of glutathione, you've got an imbalance between the production of these reactive oxygen species and their removal. And
and just in terms of like the toxic things that get produced that end up messing with our cell biology, it sounds like a lot of that is coming from not necessarily the reactive oxygen species themselves, but the lipid peroxidation byproducts that get formed when a reactive oxygen species oxidizes something like an unsaturated fatty acid.
In this condition, with the ferroptosis, yes. Yeah.
And so sort of the three levers I could imagine here that would lead you to have more oxidative stress. So one would just be some aspect of metabolism changes such that you're producing more reactive oxygen species. You could also be glutathione or antioxidant deficient in some way because you can't get the cysteine into the cell or whatever. So you could have reactive oxygen species go up. You could have antioxidant capacity go down. And then you could also just have more oxidizable stuff, like more unsaturated fatty acids in the membrane. So in other words, I could imagine two people, they're producing the exact same amount of reactive oxygen species. They have the exact same antioxidant capacity. But if one of them has a cell membrane that has much higher levels of polyunsaturated fatty acids, then there's more things that are oxidizable into toxic byproducts. Is that accurate?